Hello, and welcome back. This video is about adding data-driven functionality to the Wave Manager. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. Now, since we have built this project with C++, we have access to creating things in C++ that are better left in C++. Some aspects built in blueprints can lead to some future headaches. And one of those things is the uStruct type. So I'm going to be adding this to our project header file. You could also create a separate header file and do it in there, but I am doing this for convenience and to explain something you might not see otherwise. So I've pasted in two things here. I have an enum and a struct. The blueprint versions of these is uenum and ustruct. For the enum, we're creating an enemy type, which just uses the 4 colors available in Kenny's top-down asset pack. We're also creating a Wave Data Struct. This will include some values for the start time of that wave, the enemy type that's in that wave, how many enemies are spawned during that wave, the delay between enemies, and this is just a value that we can update in the blueprints to keep track of the time between spawns in that wave. Because we want this struct to be able to be loaded in a data table, we are inheriting from ftable row base. Lastly, I'll hit F7 to compile here. Now we've got errors here for missing type specifier int assumed. So this is showing up because this macro is just not working here. This is because the way Unreal Editor is changing the way C++ is used by adding a ton of macros and other things. It does mean that in a file that you include one of the generated macros, you also need to include a file name that you're working on with a dot generated in the center. And, typing include correctly is helpful. So that works along with this, and then compiling should work. If after you've launched into the editor and when we're making a data table, if this is not showing up, then you may need to just rebuild the entire solution. So I'm going to hit F5 and I'll see you in the editor. So in our levels folder here, I'm going to right click, go to miscellaneous, data table. Click the drop down here and you can find your wave data. Again, if that's not showing up, you may need to rebuild the solution in Visual Studio or similar. So we're going to name this DT Wave Data, and I'm going to do a -01 to match the level. So then we open that up. We add a new row. We're not actually going to use the row name. It's new row here. When you add another one, it'll say new row 1 or 2. We're kind of ignoring that. It's not relevant, so that's fine. In this case, we're going to set our start time to 2. We're just going to set our enemy type to green, a spawn count to 5, a spawn delay of 2, and delay remaining should initially just be set to 0, or stay at 0. So I personally like my data-driven data tables loaded from text files. So to do that, you can close this, right-click on the asset, export as CSV or JSON. They're very similar in their simplicity. That's CSV is literally comma separated values, so that's just a bunch of values with commas. So it's very, very simple. JSON's a little more complicated, but as a programmer, it should be pretty easy to read. So when we click that, it will pop up a window. I just want to call this wave data -01, and I'm saving it in the same folder that we're using for the data table. When I save that, Unreal Editor will find the new file, pop up this import dialog. If you click import, you'll see that it's asking to import it as a type. And then you need the data table row type, same as when we created the table table. This is just a list of structs. However, we want to cancel this. When we're back in here, now I can re-import, select the file that we just created, and now it's effectively been connected. If I then open up this JSON file in a text editor, like Visual Studio, you can see the entries here. So in here, you can edit these values if I want to change this from green to purple. So when we save that and go back into the editor again pops up the import dialog. When we hit import, we see that green has switched to purple. One thing to note is that if you then edit it through the data table in Unreal, you will need to re-export it and override the previous file. So with that done, we'll go back into our Wave Manager. I'm going to create a function named import data. In this function, we're going to call a data table function. So there's a number of these. In our case, and there's one down here, get data table row. So in our case, we want to get the data table row names. In this case, you have the option of selecting a literal data table that's been created. However, we want to right-click this, promote it to a variable, just call this a data table. Since the design we're going with is that our data table is specific to the level that it's on, we want to make sure that our data table is set to instance editable. And in our level, we find our Wave Manager. First, we save or compile, and then we have our data table here. So in this case, we can choose this data table 01. And that works fine here. If we did not set it, this would be an empty value. This function would this function would return an empty array, and then this for each would just have nothing to iterate through. Now that we have the data table row names, I said that we don't really care about them, except they are used as the entry in get data table row. So that requires the row name, and it also requires the data table. So here's where it gets a little bit tricky. If we then drag in our data table, because this is a variable, it has not been set to anything. If you compile here, this will complain because the out row is undetermined. So the two ways to fix this is if you alt-click this, you can set this to a type. This now, the out row has become blue because it is a wave data type. However, you can also just drag it out and search for wave data. So now because this pin knows that it's for a wave data, compiling is fine. Now we're just loading all this data so that we can have our wave data of type wave data. And we want this to be an array. So we can control drag this out, call add. Similarly, if I had done this part first, dragging this into here would also set this pin type, and that would work fine too. All right, next I'm going to create a spawn enemy function. This will take in a enemy type, and this is the enum we created. So one way to do this, we have an enemy type which is enum. It has 4 values. So you could drag this out. You can call switch on enemy type. This is going to give you exec pins for all the enemy types. So from here, if it's green, you can then spawn an actor. From class, you set it to the green enemy here, but that ends up being with a lot of, messy, convoluted code. If you have an enum that has like 20 entries, you really don't want to do it that way. So instead, we're just going to set up a map for convenience. This will be enemy type class, or enemy type map to class, or enemy type to class. The entry here is an enemy type. And this will be a map. In our case, this is going to be an enemy base class reference. So if you just hover on that for a sec, this will pop up. You want a class reference so that then we can drag this in, control drag this in. We're going to call find. You send along the key, which is our enemy type, and you'll get out the enemy base class. So we're just going to drag out the found because we don't have everything entered. We're going to compile so that we can go, so we can go in our enemy type class here, add some entries. So I believe it's because this is a enum to something else map. You can just click this a number of times and you'll get all the entries in the enum. If I click again, it won't let me. There's nothing else to add. We don't care about none, so we can just delete that one. In that case, this find call would just return false. And the only one we have right now is our purple. So we can set up purple enemy. With that done, if we go back into our update wave, I'm actually going to rearrange this slightly because it makes a little more sense. You don't really want to advance your enemy immediately after they're spawned. Move that down. So I'm just going to take this, hit Control X, go into our spawn enemy and Control V. And the class is now going to be just dragged in. Oh, and I should have also dragged over or copied over this here. I'm actually going to delete this print statement. And here we're just going to replace this with spawn enemy of type purple. Again, this block will be replaced in the near future. But for now, that's how it looks. So with update wave updated to call spawn enemy, it's going to work the same way it did previously. It's going to spawn immediately and then every 4 seconds. And it will never end. In a future video, we'll use the wave data array of structs to spawn the waves. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, you can do so through my Patreon linked below.